In the 40 years that have passed, I have never harbored any affection for you." At their ruby nuptials, the husband remarked to his wife, "You were merely convenient." After that, she rose and disclosed the information that she had been concealing for an extended period of time. The guests were taken aback by the news that her sister had spilled her glass. Please indicate the country from which you are viewing this video in the remarks section before we proceed. Take pleasure in the act of listening. On that crisp May evening, the Willowbrook Country Club was a vision of elegance, its stately hall aglow with the warm flicker of chandeliers and the gentle murmur of celebration. Every table was adorned with ruby-red roses, and the sound of champagne glasses clinking filled the air as Matilda and Harlan Grayson celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. The couple's presumably enduring love was evident in the merriment of friends, family, and local dignitaries who had assembled. Matilda, who was attired in a blue floral dress with a pearl necklace that caught the light, moved gracefully among the guests. Her smile was polished yet tinged with an unfathomable profundity. Harlan, who was gray-haired and stoic, stood beside her, his attractiveness a practiced facade that concealed the tempest that was brewing beneath. The couple's anniversary speech marked the culmination of the evening. Harlan cleared his throat, his voice piercing the silence with a chilling sharpness. He began by sweeping his gaze across the throng before settling on Matilda. 40 years is a long time, he said, and I've come to a realization, Matilda. The room fell silent. A single day during those 40 years I harbored no affection for you. You were merely expedient. The words struck the audience with the force of a strike, eliciting a collective groan. Matilda's blue eyes were wide with astonishment as she grasped the microphone, her hands trembling and her smile froze. Every guest leaned forward, their breaths held, as the room collapsed into a stunned silence. Matilda then adjusted her posture with a deliberate, slow inhalation, maintaining a regal demeanor despite the tremor in her voice. "Is it convenient, you say?" she responded, her voice tinged with a steeliness that astounded her. "Well, Harlan, if we are being honest, I have also been concealing something that could potentially account for my continued presence over the years." Her sister Leonora, who was seated at the front table, let out a sharp cry. Her champagne glass slid from her fingertips, fracturing on the polished floor. The sound echoed like a gunfire, capturing the attention of all in the room. The guests exchanged wide-eyed glimpses, their curiosity piqued as Matilda prepared to reveal a secret that would unravel the fabric of their shared history. As Harlan's hands clenched the podium, his smirk faltered. "Matilda, what is the game you are playing?" he hissed. However, her gaze remained unwavering as she shook her head. "Harlan, I am not amusing you. You believe that this union was advantageous to you. It was, in a sense, for me as well, but not for the reasons you believe." She paused, allowing the tension to accumulate, her eyes sparkling with unshed tears. "I was expectant at the time of our wedding. However, the child was not yours." The room erupted in murmurs, and Harlan's face was devoid of color, his mouth alternately opening and closing like a fish out of water. Leonora's sobs were muted but audible as she concealed her face in her hands. Matilda gazed at her sister, a silent plea in her eyes before returning to the throng. "Jacob Collier was the father, a man whom I held in the highest regard. He was employed at my father's factory and we had intended to escape together. However, he was fatally struck by a vehicle just weeks prior to the nuptials. I was compelled to marry Harlan by my family in order to preserve my reputation and provide a name for my child. Additionally, Harlan required a companion to safeguard his inheritance. It was a transaction, not a love story." The guests were seated in a state of awe as they attempted to piece together the scandal, their murmurs becoming increasingly audible. However, Matilda was not yet completed. She continued, her voice ebbing to a conspiratorial silence. "What I didn't know then is that Harlan had his own reasons, darker ones. He was not merely expedient for me, I was a protective barrier for him. Additionally, I shall disclose all of this tonight." Harlan leaped forward, his face distended with fury. However, security officers intervened and restrained him. The audience was captivated by the narrative, which promised a journey into a maze of secrets that would captivate them and keep them riveted to the screen, anticipating the next revelation. The stately hall of Willowbrook Country Club appeared to contract under the weight of Matilda's revelation, and the air was dense with anticipation and disbelief. Harlan's face was a mask of desperation and wrath as he struggled against the security officer's grasp. He yelled, "You are a liar," his voice cracking as the audience murmured, and their eyes darted between him and Matilda. She stood erect, her pearl necklace glistening like a badge of resilience, her gaze unwavering in the face of the pandemonium. Leonora remained bent over, her sobs a low, quiet undercurrent to the escalating drama. The fractured champagne glass at her feet was a stark symbol of the evening's unraveling. Matilda's hand was raised, and the room was silenced by a gesture that conveyed the authority of 40 years of suppressed truth. "Am I a liar?" she stated, her voice piercing Harlan's objections. "Harlan, I would like to hear your perspective. Inform them of the reason for your marriage to me, and the urgency with which you required my presence that you would eliminate James from my existence." The crowd was apprehensive at the mention of James, and their curiosity was now tangible. Harlan's shoulders slumped as the officers tightened their grip, resulting in a weakened struggle. However, his eyes were ablaze with a combination of terror and defiance. Leonora raised her head, her visage pale from tears, and whispered, "Maddie, please." Matilda's expression softened briefly as she turned to her sister. "You have carried this for an extended period of time. It is time for them to be informed." Her voice stabilized as she addressed the audience once more. "The night James passed away, Leonora was present. She observed the vehicle that struck him and identified the driver. Ladies and gentlemen, it was not an error. This was homicide." The room erupted in gasps, with some individuals standing and others gripping their chests in astonishment, causing the chairs to scrape. Harlan's chuckle was acerbic, emitting a hollow sound that only served to underscore the tension. "Are you confident in your ability to demonstrate this?" He scoffed. However, Matilda's smile was icy. "I am capable of doing so. Leonora retained evidence, including photographs and a letter from you that acknowledged the incident. She has transferred it to the authorities, who are currently en route." Harlan's knees buckled slightly as his arrogance collapsed, and the crowd's murmurs transformed into a roar. Matilda's tone remained unwavering as she continued. "I discovered the information years later, but I refrained from speaking. I was obligated to safeguard my son Daniel and my daughter Leonora. Harlan intimidated us and employed his authority to maintain our silence. However, this will conclude tonight." Daniel, a tall man with Matilda's determined jawline and James's penetrating blue eyes, moved forward. All eyes were on him as he spoke, and the room fell silent once more. "Harlan claimed me as his own. I am the infant she bore. My mother reared me with the knowledge of the truth, protecting me from his malice. Tonight, we reclaim our identities." The guests were captivated as the narrative veered toward justice, with the camera lingering on Daniel's resolute countenance, assuring them that there would be additional revelations. However, the drama was not yet concluded. Matilda's voice dwindled to a shivering murmur as she turned to Harlan. "Yes, you married me for convenience. However, it was not solely about my family's financial security. You were evading an object, correct? A debt, a scandal, and a past that you believed I would be able to conceal through my silence." Harlan's silence was incriminating, and his eyes darted as if in quest of an escape that no longer existed. The audience leaned in, anxious to witness the outcome of this confrontation as the sound of sirens intensified outside, indicating that the police were in close proximity. Leonora stood, drying her tears, and presented a small envelope to a nearby officer who had recently entered. She stated, her voice quivering but resolute, "It is all here. This is the evidence he cannot refute." Harlan appeared to be in a state of confinement as the officer nodded and approached him. Matilda's fortitude was revitalized by the presence of her sister and son as she grasped Daniel's hand. She addressed the audience. "This is not solely about us. It is about the triumph of truth. Harlan will be held accountable for his actions." The guests whispered in astonishment as the camera focused on Harlan's defeated expression as he was led away. However, Matilda's subsequent statements suggested a more profound level. She stated, her eyes beaming with a combination of triumph and grief, that there is more to this narrative, a final secret that will alter everything. The suspense gradually increased as the screen was held to her face, guaranteeing that viewers would remain until the conclusion to discover the final twist in this captivating narrative. The stately hall of Willowbrook Country Club was filled with a tumult of anticipation and astonishment as the police escorted Harlan out, his wrists cuffed behind him. Harlan's once proud demeanor had been reduced to a defeated slump. The ruby-red roses on the table appeared almost taunting at this point, their vibrant color providing a stark contrast to the fractured illusions of the evening. Matilda's pearl necklace served as a testament to the sophistication she preserved amid the disorder, as she stood at the center of the stage, her blue floral dress capturing the light. Leonora, still trembling from her confession, grasped Matilda's arm in search of solace in the sisterhood that had tolerated decades of secrets. Daniel, her son, stood beside her, his presence a quiet fortitude. The guests, who were a combination of local dignitaries, remote relatives, and old acquaintances, remained seated, their eyes wide with anticipation for the next chapter of the unfolding drama. As Harlan was led outside, the sound of his protestations diminished, and it was replaced by the gentle hum of whispers and the occasional clink of a glass that was laid down too rapidly. Taking a deep inhale, Matilda's gaze swept the room to ensure that she had everyone's attention before she spoke again. She stated, "I told you there was more," her voice remaining steady but tinged with an emotion that suggested a more profound trauma. Harlan's confession and his transgression are only components of the narrative. There is a rationale for my prolonged silence, a rationale for allowing him to believe that he had prevailed. Matilda continued, "When I married Harlan, I was a young woman, heartbroken and pregnant, with no one to turn to but my family. Daniel silently encouraged her by squeezing her hand. They perceived Harlan as a viable alternative, a respectable individual from a reputable family who required a wife to safeguard his inheritance. However, what they were unaware of, and what I was unaware of until years later, was that Harlan was engulfed in debt, gambling, unwise investments, and a series of unsuccessful ventures. He was on the verge of financial ruin. He would resort to homicide in order to obtain my family's money, which was his sustenance." The audience murmured, and a few visitors exchanged knowing stares, as if Harlan's past was gradually coming into focus. Matilda's voice became more reflective and gentler. James's death was not solely motivated by envy. It is true that Harlan was aware of my affection for James and our intention to flee together. However, our relationship was more profound than that. James had discovered Harlan's debts and his interactions with unscrupulous individuals. James confronted him, threatening to expose him and warn my family. Harlan responded by silencing him, running him down on a peaceful street and feigning an accident. Leonora's remorse was a weighty burden, and she let out a choked sob. She murmured loudly enough for the front rows to hear, and I witnessed the event. I was utilizing the alley as a shortcut to return home from the factory. I observed Harlan's vehicle accelerate and James' attempt to leapfrog. I was at a loss for words. I was uncertain of what to do. It was too late by the time I reached him. Harlan drove off, and I did not inform anyone. I was terrified. Maddie then required my assistance. She was expectant and susceptible. I believed that the sole method of safeguarding her was to remain silent. Matilda silently forgave Leonora by placing a palm on her shoulder. She stated, "You acted in accordance with your convictions," and then returned her attention to the audience. However, Harlan's strategy did not conclude with James. He believed that by marrying me, he had secured his future. He was unaware that my father had already safeguarded our family's wealth by placing it in a trust that Harlan was unable to access. He believed that he had prevailed for 4 decades, that he had outsmarted us all. However, he was mistaken. Curiosity was palpable as they leaned forward. Matilda's voice assumed a new level of intensity. Daniel, my son, was the beneficiary of the trust. My father was aware that Harlan was not the person he appeared to be, and he ensured that our legacy would be passed down to my child, not my spouse. Harlan spent decades attempting to gain my trust by manipulating me and issuing threats in the hope that I would relent. However, I refrained from doing so. I persisted because I was confident that I would eventually cultivate the courage to disclose him and return to Daniel what was rightfully his. Daniel advanced with a composed yet authoritative demeanor. I have been aware of the truth since I was an adolescent. Harlan's cruelty and James's story were recounted by my mother. We collaborated to organize this evening, not only to commemorate an anniversary but also to conclude a nightmare. Tonight, I assume responsibility for the trust, and Harlan is held accountable for the actions he took against my biological father. Matilda raised a hand, silencing the room, which erupted in ovation, a mixture of relief and admiration. She added one final detail, her voice ebbing to a near murmur. This was a fact that Harlan was unaware of, and even Daniel was unable to fully comprehend. It pertains to James and a commitment I made to him prior to his passing. The story's final heart-wrenching revelation was promised, and the camera focused in on her face, her eyes gleaming with unshed tears. The suspense built. The stately hall of Willowbrook Country Club was enveloped in a tense silence, the air thick with the echoes of Matilda's revelations. The remaining guests were enveloped in a soft, almost ethereal radiance from the chandeliers, and their expressions were a blend of anticipation, sympathy, and astonishment. The sound of Harlan's restraints clinking faded into the night, leaving a vacuum that Matilda now filled with her commanding presence. Harlan had been taken away. Daniel stood beside her, his jaw set with determination, while Leonora clung to her sister's arm, her tear-streaked visage a testimony to the emotional toll of the evening. The ruby-red roses on the tables appeared to wither under the weight of the truth, their vibrant hue a diminishing symbol of a marriage founded on deception. Matilda's final words lingered in the air, a promise of one final secret that captivated the attention of all. She reached into the small clutch she carried, her fingertips quivering slightly as she withdrew a weathered envelope, its edges yellowed with age. She stated that this is the final component of the narrative, displaying it for all to observe, a letter from James, which was composed the night before his death. He entrusted it to me with the instruction to maintain its security and only open it if I ever required the fortitude to resist harm. As she meticulously broke the seal, the audience leaned forward, their respiration held, her hands steadied with each passing second. She began to read the letter, her voice quivering as she unfolded it. My dearest Matilda, if you are reading this, it means that I am gone and you are confronting a darkness that I was unable to defend you from. Please be assured that I held you in the highest regard and that our son will forever bear my essence. But there is more. I uncovered a fact about Harlan that has the potential to devastate him. He is not merely in debt, he is affiliated with a criminal organization that launders money through my factory. I confronted him, and I am concerned that he will do whatever it takes to muzzle me. If he does, apply this information. A ledger is concealed behind the third panel on the left wall in the factory's old storage room. It substantiates all claims. Advocate for Maddie, our firstborn. Fight for us. The revelation added a layer of peril and intrigue to an already explosive night, causing the room to erupt in astonished murmurs. Matilda's gaze met Daniel's as she lowered the missive. She stated that Harlan deathed James because of that ledger. It is the reason he wedded me, to prevent me from discovering it and to exert control over me. However, I did locate it several years ago when I returned to the factory following my father's passing. I concealed it until the appropriate moment arrived. That moment has arrived tonight. She gestured to an officer who had been loitering near the stage, and he stepped forward, clutching a thick leather-bound book, the ledger. Daniel retrieved it from the officer, maintaining his composure as he opened it, revealing pages of meticulous records. The records included dates, quantities, and the names of mysterious figures associated with Harlan's business. Daniel stated, his voice resonating with authority, that this is not solely about the assassination of my father. The objective is to demolish a network that Harlan has established. The police will utilize this to deconstruct it, thereby preventing any other individuals from experiencing the same level of suffering as we have. The room was filled with a combination of relief and admiration as the crowd applauded. However, Matilda was not yet finished. Her voice softened as she added, "There is one more thing." James composed a postscript. He advised me to accept if I ever encountered love again because he would desire my happiness. For 40 years, I believed that this entailed remaining with Harlan and safeguarding our son. However, I have now come to understand that it refers to the act of let go. Leonora, you are my heart, and Daniel, you are my fortitude. We are liberated when we unite. She embraced them both, and tears finally streamed down her cheekbones. The guests rose, their ovation a thunderous tide of support. The camera then panned to the ledger, then to the unoccupied spot where Harlan had stood, before settling on Matilda, Daniel, and Leonora as they strode out of the hall arm in arm. The screen appeared to transition to black, and the text read, "Justice was served. Love is enduring. A legacy reclaimed." However, an indistinct sound, a phone ringing, began to play as the credits began to roll, suggesting a potential continuation. This ensured that viewers would remain until the very end, curious about what might happen next. The stars were obscured by the radiance of police lights, and the night air was chilly. Matilda paused, gazing at the ledger in Daniel's possession. She murmured, "We did it for James." Leonora nodded, drying her eyes, "And for us." Daniel smiled with a rare sense of buoyancy in his expression as he contemplated the future. The story concluded with a sense of closure, yet the camera lingered on their silhouettes against the club's facade, leaving a door ajar for imagination, an ideal hook to continue the audience's interest.